Welcome back. Well, Women's Month is nearly over, and much has been said and done about the plight of women during the past 30 days. But judging by the news reports of what women again went through during this time, the situation, you would agree, is dire on the ground. I want to bring in our Eastern Cape reporter, Nqonji, to take stock of the situation in her province. And a very good morning to you.
A very good morning to you, Blaine.
Well, you covered a number of gender-based violence stories this month. The murder of two elderly women in Port Elizabeth, I remember, is one of them. The murder of a young mother. There were also incidents in other parts of the province, I understand. Tell us more.
Indeed, Blaine, it has been a very bitter Women's Month for women in the Eastern Cape, as many of them lost their lives in the hands of gender-based violence. And now this comes at a time when, of course, the world is fighting and holding hands in a bid to fight against a pandemic. But some of these women have had to duck and dive, protecting themselves and protecting their lives from gender-based violence. Indeed, we opened this month in the Eastern Cape with yet again another tragic death of two elderly people. Now we're talking about a 70 and a 75-year-old from Nqonji Township, which is just close by, not so far from the northern areas. Those people were also murdered. They were just from a funeral and had just gotten back home when they were held ransom by robbers that they found in their house, who then, tied their hands and tied their legs and then murdered them. But another puzzling factor on the story is the fact that there were apparently other members of the family inside that house who were just locked in another room and were never killed, and some of them were actually men who did not get harmed, which raised a lot of questions, upon residents of this area, whether was there a particular agenda behind this murder, or if they were murdered specifically because they were women. So a number of people gathered outside this house, protesting against the murder of women, as they always do. Now, Blaine, one thing I have noticed about these communities is that they have developed this sense of tradition of, coming together and being in solidarity when one of their own is murdered, and they start crying. This gives them a chance to outline some of their plights and some of their problems, and once again emphasize on the issue of lack of safety, which is one of the key problems or areas within this metro. So that was just one of the many, gender-based violence cases that I was going to follow this month. Well, just shortly after that, another case of a young girl. Now we are talking about a 5-year-old straight from the 75 who was murdered, allegedly raped, and then dumped in a pit latrine. The community started searching for this young girl for some time before she was discovered, or her body was discovered by her father, dumped in a pit latrine. But the mother was very angry after this, and shortly after that there were allegations that she had actually castrated the man who was involved in this, or in the murder of her daughter, and the case had been going on in court. One thing that was puzzling to the residents is the fact that the attention seemed to have switched from the young girl who had been raped with no suspect apprehended following that, straight to the mother who had allegedly castrated the rapist, which made the residents even more angry at that reality, or the reality that nothing much is being done by the Department of Justice, as they allege, to make sure that they bring these perpetrators to book. But again, Blaine, just not so far from this particular house was a mother who was crying, desperately seeking for answers. Now, in this case, it was an 8-year-old young girl who was allegedly raped again by a family friend. But I will say that she was fortunate enough to not have been killed. However, did acquire a lifetime scar. Now, this mother was very sad and she could not stop crying. It seemed that the girl had been rather less traumatized than the mother by how we looked at things, because at least she could speak about it. She was able to engage us, whereas her mom felt like a failure and continued to ask what is it that, they had done in order for them to go through to go through something like that with their daughter being raped by what was supposed to be a family friend, someone who was supposed to protect her. And in this particular incident, it's a case of an old man asking a child to go to a shop, sending the child to the shop to get him something. And in that process, he apparently followed her and then closed her in a nearby corner and then tripped her. When she fell, he started molesting her. But it is said that some of her friends actually found them and then they started screaming and shouting, and that is where he actually left. But Blaine, again, another story on the case of gender-based violence occurred in the northern areas. Those are the gang-ridden areas of Port Elizabeth, which we recently covered, or we recently followed. We went to this family that was very miserable. They were crying and praying, asking what is it that they could have possibly done wrong, for their 30-year-old to be murdered. And they discovered this girl with her throat slit, and she was half naked, which suggests that she could have been raped. Now, this young woman was apparently on her way from a friend's house when this happened, and she was dumped in a nearby field right opposite her house, which was even hard on her mom and her family, because apparently the mother was one of the first few people who discovered this young woman in that situation or in that state. But that just goes to show that the plight of GBV in the Nelson Mandela Bay, in the Eastern Cape, and I understand that in the country as a whole, is still very major. It's an issue that has been spoken about repeatedly. There has been marches that were going on. People have been urged to hold hands and be in solidarity against this fight. With this case again, where this young woman was raped, we saw again this tradition of women coming together and once again protesting and calling for quick intervention. They were asking what more can they done, because they have held placards to try and recruit more supporters, to call on men to stop molesting and to stop murdering women. But they say that this seems not to be working, or nothing is being done about it. We spoke to a very passionate woman who was also an advocate or an activist in gender-based violence, who was saying that she had just been from another case of similar nature not so long ago, saying that in the same area 4 women were murdered in the same fashion, and they were allegedly raped within the space of a month, that is since the beginning of this month until now. So she was very passionate, wondering what more can they now done, what more can be done, and bringing a question or questioning the government and the role that they play in terms of attempting to resolve these issues, by saying that it looked like there were funds that were being allocated in terms of fighting GBV, but then they did not translate to where these things are happening, or they were not experiencing any relief in terms of trying to kill the scourge, or to decrease the number of women who are getting killed every day. But then again, they had a question of whether are they really next, especially with regards to the fact that when you look at the fact that it's now happening closer to home, which of course will bring some sort of an idea that it might soon happen to you because it's happening next to you. And I suppose it is actually a right and actually correct and a brave question that requires answers to, because it has been stated that about 7,000 cases in the Eastern Cape were reported since June up until this point. So it just gives you a picture of how many women are getting, the statistic was specifically on the rape incidents, not the murder one, but it just gives you a clear picture of what women in the Eastern Cape are facing and of how legit their question and their fears and their worries seem to be. So yeah, it's been such a series actually, or such cases have been occurring over and over and over and over again, with women crying, with women asking for intervention, asking for help, and saying that they are not receiving anything. But the Premier of the Eastern Cape has actually spoken on this situation, saying that they are working round the clock to try and stifle the sentencing, that is, when it comes to gender-based violence cases. Every suspect that has been discovered or that is discovered to have been guilty of gender-based violence has been, threatened that they're going to get a stiffer challenge. But again, a number of these cases that I have covered currently, out of them, only one suspect has been arrested in association with this. So it raises another question again as to what is happening and how is it going to be resolved, because the government is trying to intensify sentencing, whereas at the same time no one is getting sentenced or is getting arrested for most of these cases. But right now, let's just go to one of the packages or the stories that I have been following. A life list at the hands of gender-based violence. The scream of her devastated mother signals the misery in this home. Leaning upon each other to source strength as the pain becomes too severe. What used to be a room filled with laughter, now a constant reminder of the loss. The family is barely coping, but keeping strong for one another.
My mother is broken. She's broken, definitely she's broken. And she's just keeping herself because my father is even more broken. So she tried to be the anchor, keeping us all together. But we know for a fact that she's broken. She takes the hardest of us all. Because they were the people, she was one of the first people that found my sister in that situation on the scene. So she told me the other day she can't get that picture out of her mind.
This has left many questions in the hearts of those close to the deceased. The good deeds of this family throughout the years seem to have gone by unnoticed.
What makes me more furious is that we are not related to any gangs. None of my brothers, none of my sisters. We are not related to drugs. We are not related to all those other funny stuff, to rapes, your murders. None of us have ever been in jail for stuff like that. So we are very respectable people in the community. Like my father is highly respected in the community because he's doing a lot for the community as a pastor. Myself, my sisters, my brothers. So this thing, we can't just accept this thing.
Women in this community have been reminded once more of how unsafe they are. Some already fallen victim and their trauma triggered.
On my way to work, I was also attacked last year. And since then, it's just been, you just feel that anger when something like this happened. Because I was still lucky. I can still talk about it. Melissa can't talk about it. There's lots of other women that went through similar things, but are so scared to speak about it. Because if we speak about it, nothing is going to happen about it.
We are not safe. We don't know who's next, who's the next target. And I think that we will never be able to trust a man, if I can say it like that, near ourselves, near our kids right now. So things will change. Things will never be the same in the street, especially because the scene was too close to us. I think we won't overcome this thing.
A movement called Enough is calling for quick intervention. They say the government is not doing enough to address this plight, while women are dying every day.
The president declared gender-based violence and femicide a state of emergency. There are funds, but the funds whatever they're doing there does not translate to the ground. On the ground, we are stuck between gang-related violence and gender-based violence and the femicide. Many of us are undergoing abuse as I speak to you now, and we cannot speak because where will we go? We have been failed over and over. And so I do not have a clear answer to your question as to what more can be done. Melissa will be gone and forgotten, and there will be another hashtag to focus on. And another, until you see my face next to a hashtag or my name on social media platforms next to a hashtag, or until we have to turn the tables and do it for you.
One suspect has been arrested in connection to the murder. The residents say this is the fourth gruesome murder of a young woman in the northern areas since the beginning of this month.
And you can hear the frustration from those women there that are interviewed. I mean, women have had to live with the pernicious scourge of gender-based violence for decades here in South Africa. And just look at it internationally as well. I mean, activist Tarana Burke promoted the phrase #MeToo back in 2006. It was a call for unity against the pernicious scourge of gender-based violence. It brings attention to the sexual harassment and sexual violence that women had to endure. So still a lot of work to be done. The other big stories that you're covering, the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the informal economy. It's all too apparent, you would agree. I was just looking at an interesting research done by the Rhodes UCT collaboration, revealing that in South Africa, black women are carrying the biggest socioeconomic burden of COVID-19 crisis. Tell us more.
Well, indeed, Blaine, that is true. Black women are indeed said to be carrying, having the worst side of this. They are actually bearing the brunt of it all. With the study done, following a research that there was very little that was being done on the impacts of COVID-19 when it comes to other aspects other than the medical route. So it was discovered then that the women out of 3 million who had lost, 3 million people actually who had lost their jobs, 2 million of them were women. Which actually gives you a reflection, obviously, again, of the issue of inequalities when it comes to, gender inequality. And the study had some bit of, facts that it revealed about this case, stating that a large number of people were actually locked out of the labor market completely during this COVID-19 pandemic, and that, a number of them out of those were women, and another large number, about, 50% of people reporting zero income throughout this COVID-19 period, which again, gives a reflection of the socio-economic challenges that are facing this country now, especially people who are women. And again, another interesting fact that came out of the study is the fact that, apart from the fact that women were the most affected, but when it comes to the grant or the government grant that was rolled out, men benefited more than women. About 2/3 of men were actually the ones to receive the grant, which once again shows this being a problem or being quite applied. So there were a number of recommendations that came about with this research, in an attempt to try and maybe find solution to some of the things. And one of them that were actually interesting was the issue of, food, things like food parcels and the 350 rands grant that they recommended following this study, that they might maybe be made permanent, because the South African economy is, of course, taking a toll following this, and there are a number of people who have been unemployed as a result of this. So things are only getting worse instead of them getting better, especially for the middle class and also the poor people. And the second one that actually emerged from the study is the issue of UIF, that the government needs to actually reframe their unemployment insurance fund after it was discovered that, a number of domestic workers did not get their UIF following this closure or following the pandemic. So it is one of the things that was suggested. And as you know, again, Blaine, that when it comes to domestic workers, it's predominantly women, which gives you an idea again of how much they have suffered during this period. So there has been a number of recommendations that have emerged out of this, and also in terms of maybe increasing the grant, that is the different grants like the old age and the child grant that the government currently rolls out in order to try and meet the economic demands, especially following this plight, which will of course result to a problem or a crisis for most people here in South Africa. But of course, what really stood out of this research is the number of women who have actually suffered due to the lockdown or due to the pandemic, and the number of women who seem to have been neglected in terms of getting things like grant and getting assistance from the government. But once again, we did take to the streets of Port Elizabeth to try and speak to a few women to see how they felt, especially those in informal businesses, that is street vendors, just to get an idea of how their businesses was going or were going. And I am going to link straight to that story to see what they had to say.
An estimated 3 million jobs were lost due to the pandemic. But 2 million of those were held by women. An alarming and very sad reality for South African women. The telephone survey quizzed more than 7,000 individuals.
Researchers from Wits University, Daniela Casale and Dori Posel, used the same data that I've analyzed and found that of the 3 million jobs that were probably lost in April due to the lockdown and the pandemic, 2/3 of those, or 2 million of the 3 million, were lost by women. So it really does seem that this she session has come about in South Africa as well.
The results of the research highlighted the existing struggles women faced in the labor market.
That this particular crisis has really exacerbated the pre-existing inequalities and vulnerabilities. So South African women have been at a disadvantage in the labor market before this crisis and will continue to be. But on top of those existing vulnerabilities, they've really borne the brunt of this crisis in quite a startling way.
Furthermore, the research concluded that men received more support than women during this time.
If we look at, for example, the special COVID-19 grant that government has rolled out, 2/3 of those have been awarded to men, or have been given to men. So there's a little bit of a lopsided feature of the support package. Women were disadvantaged more than men, but the special COVID grant was received by men more than by women.
The economy is getting back on track on all levels. Street vendors in Port Elizabeth are trading again, but the lockdown stifled their meager income.
I did not receive any assistance from the government. I don't even get grant, and I did not even receive the 350 Rand COVID support grant. My business has been really affected. As a result, my daughter still can't come to the street. I also had to close, but we opened again, but my children are still at home.
The research found that women in informal economy worked less than half of the typical hours per month from before than during the lockdown. But again, men were better off, only losing a quarter of their working hours in the pandemic. The recommendation stemming from the study is clear. Women are economically vulnerable and were severely affected by the economic shutdown, and the bulk of support should be directed to them.
This study finding that the typical earnings for women in informal self-employment decreased by nearly 70% between February and April 2020. And that's indeed sobering.
Indeed, it is actually a lot, a number of people are seeing a financial strain when it comes to, the number of hours. And when you're looking at the reality of the economy now that, the pandemic is slowly but surely, coming down, or the numbers are beginning to stabilize of people who are infected. And now we are beginning again to reopen the economy. It is quite a strain to see that a number of people have actually lost their jobs, and that the people are continuing to lose their jobs, and with less hours it directly translates to less income, so which means that a number of people, especially women, could suffer and are going to suffer from this. But we are again looking forward to see how the economy is going to look like, especially in Port Elizabeth, as we know that we are headed to, the tourism month, and the Nelson Mandela Bay is quite big when it comes to tourism. It's a part of its main sources for the economy. So it will be interesting to see what then happens, whether the tourism sector will be able to recover or has been able to recover also going forward. But right now, from myself and Nqonji and my colleague Mcebisi Slingile, it's back to you in studio.
Team Eastern Cape, thank you very much indeed for your great reporting, giving us a sense of where we were this week, and also throwing forward to what we can expect this week under Nqonji then live for us. We are still going to be touching base with our colleagues in the Free State as well as KwaZulu-Natal, so stay tuned for that regional roundup. We're going to take a quick break, get more news next. Stay with us.